Hey, I'm Chris Ralph, the professional prospector, and today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about extracting gold and silver from ores. Now, if you've ever been interested in, gold ores from old mines and that kind of stuff, and how would you get the gold out of them? Well, that's what I'm going to talk about today. And excuse the car noises in the background. There's a road out not far from us, but today I'm inside an old stamp mill, and we're going to talk about how they did it the old school way and how that can give ideas to you to how you would extract gold from rock. Because if you have rock that has decent gold in it, it's hard to sell it to places. There are a few custom mills that are around that you could take ore to, but I'll tell you that the custom mills don't want you to bring them 100 or 200 pounds of rock. They don't want that. They want 3,000, 5,000, 10,000 pounds of rock. They want several tons. And in just the handling of smaller lots like that will absorb any profit that you might make, because they'll have to charge extra fees for handling small lots and doing different stuff. So if you're interested in learning how to take it out yourself, that's what we're going to talk about today. Now, the first step, in any processing is to crush the rock. And in this mill behind me are the stamp mills, the stamps that would bound and break the rock up. We're going to take a closer look at that and talk about how that works. But this actually was a custom mill that operated from before the turn of the century in the 1800s all the way up until the early 1950s. And they would take lots from small miners and process them. Again, they wanted 3, 4, 10 tons of material, not 3, 4, 5 pounds, 3, 4, 5, 10 tons of rock, so that they could process it and get a good recovery. And we're going to talk about how it happened. There's actually up on the hill above me, behind me, there's a little ramp where a truck could back in and dump into a bin, and it had a grizzly that would sort out the biggest rocks. It had basically old mine rails that were about 6 inches apart, and if the rock was bigger than that, somebody had to go there and beat on it with a sledgehammer until it would go through. And then it would go through into a jaw crusher, and I'm going to show you a little bit about jaw crushers in a second.
Here is a cutaway illustration of a modern jaw crusher. You can see the larger material comes in at the top, and it gets crunched and leaves out the bottom as much smaller sizes. Basically what happens is the orange near vertical piece on the right doesn't move, but the more slanted piece on the left does move. It kind of moves in an elliptical motion, and as it continues to move, it pinches the rocks and allows them to be broken, pulls apart slightly, allows them to slip down, and then pinches together and breaks the rocks in a continuous cycle of shifting back and forth to crush them down.
And then after it was in a jaw crusher, it would be crushed down to a size that you could do something with it in these stamp mills. The stamp mills would not take football-sized rocks. They took, maybe like 2-inch minus, or maybe 1.5 inch minus, something like that, and then ground it down to sand. When you're taking and crushing rocks, it's better to have multiple steps where you crush from big to smaller and small to sand. There are some chain mill and hammer mills that you can put in bigger rocks, but it takes forever to beat them down from bigger sizes down to sand. That's why that when I do a crushing of my own rock, I have a little jaw crusher. I've showed you pictures of before, but here's what it looks like.
This is the little jaw crusher that I have in my garage. It takes material, I think, up to about 5 inches wide by 3 inches at the most. It may be more like 4 by 2. It can be either hand operated or run by a motor, but it breaks the material down and gets it down to, I have it set to go to about minus half an inch. And it works real well, and it'll take a decent sized rock that's too big to put in here. Of course, I have to break with a sledgehammer. But it works on the exact same principles as the much larger jaw crushers.
And I will use that jaw crusher to break it down to about minus a half inch or minus 3/4 inch, something like that. And then I'll put it in my chain mill and take it down to sand sizes. So let's talk a little bit more now about the stamp mill, which was the old school way of doing it.
So I mentioned the camshaft that drives the stamp mills, and this is a better picture of it. You can see on the left a large wheel, and that wheel makes a horizontal shaft there spin. And each of these items on the camshaft, as they spin around, they would lift the rods upward. And you can see each of the rods has a piece on it that gets caught when the thing spins, is lifted up. Those are the tappets, and it lifts up the stamp rods, and then as it turns past a certain point, it allows them to drop back down, and then it lifts it up and they drop back down. Anyway, this is how the stamp mill is driven.
Okay, I'm going to talk a little bit more about stamp mills, and I have my friend Jeff Smith here from Smith's Gold, and Jeff has a lot of great prospecting videos on his channel, so I want to recommend to you Smith's Gold. Look it up on YouTube and go and watch some of Jeff's fun stuff. He goes out a lot with Gary of Two Toes, and they go out and find a lot of gold and have a lot of interesting and fun times, and it's an interesting channel. It's a good one, so I recommend it.
You'll even see him in a couple of them.
Hopefully. Anyway, we're taking a look at these stamp mills, and I was just asking Jeff, did you have any thoughts about them, or what do you think? And he said he's seen a couple of them run, and he asked me about this piece. And we picked it up and moved it here, and it's really heavy. and this is one that's pretty much worn out. What these are is, this piece is called, I'm not going to pick it up because it's kind of heavy. It's called a shoe. And anytime you're crushing rock, whether it's with a jaw crusher or a chain mill or anything else, a stamp mill, you got to worry about the wear and tear, because rock is hard, and even on steel it wears, right? So in these stamp mills, they crush thousands and thousands of tons. And what they did was, at the bottom here, this part that drops and does the crushing, they actually have a replaceable piece at the bottom of the part that actually does the smack on the rock. And this one, it only has about an inch left, but this is the kind of thing that they replace. And there's one here, I don't know if you can see it, but this one is a good 4.5 inches.
Yeah.
Thick, and so it has that thickness to wear out as it's crushing the rock. Basically, these things, there's 5 different basic stamps, and the group of 5 is called a battery. And what would happen is, there's a camshaft up top, we'll maybe take a look at that later, that would raise and drop these things. And they dropped actually pretty fast. They dropped like usually faster than 1 time a second. So it's boom, 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 boom. You feeling the dirt on the inside there? Yeah, there's some rock down there. Anyway, as they dropped, this thing would be full would have water in it, and so it would be a slurry. And there's an iron pad down underneath that's also replaceable. And as it broke, the stuff would be crushed, and then when it was sized, this is a screen, and when it was sized enough to go through the screen, then it would come out and get treated to get the gold extracted. So the first step in really extracting gold from a rock is to crush the rock. I mean, that's what has to be done. Now, the screens were replaceable. This one is kind of small. Most of them.
That's a fine one, right?
Yeah, that's a real fine one. A lot of people ask about, I've been asked a lot about what the right size to crush gold ore down to is. And I'll tell you that most of these stamp mills, the typical size is about 20 mesh, which is, this is probably 30 or 40 mesh. It's really small. that size. That's like, this is a super coarse size one. You can see these are what, about 1/4 inch?
Yeah.
And 1/4 inch is way too big. If you only crush your gold ore down to 1/4 inch, you're going to leave a lot of actual gold in the rock. So what do you think? You think these things would be pretty wild if they were all running?
There's 30 of them here, right?
Yeah, there's 30 of them, and these mills made a lot of noise. And the old gold milling towns, like this is part of Silver City. This is the Donovan Mill in Silver City, Nevada, which is the Virginia City area. This really made a lot of racket.
I know the one at the Empire Mine only shut down like for Christmas.
Yeah, I've heard stories that people would say they couldn't sleep.
They couldn't sleep and they wanted to get over so they could go back to
There was
sleep.
no noise.
Yeah.
They couldn't, they were
That's
used to
crazy.
sleeping to the hum and racket of the mill, and when they shut the mill down for a holiday, the people were like, it's too quiet. Funny stuff. All right, well, we've talked about crushing the rock some. Let's talk then about what you do next to separate the gold out of the sand that you created out of your gold. Okay, so one of the standard things that a lot of people use if you're going to process gold ores to extract the gold is a shaker table. Have you ever seen a shaker table run?
Yeah, only on TV.
Only on TV. They are a little tricky to set up. Part of the difficulty of them is to get them to the right angle, and another thing about them is I've seen people try to just set them on a floor. The problem is they shake, and if they're not bolted into a concrete floor, then the whole unit shakes instead of the table. It's the whole thing is shaking. You need to confine the shaking to the table where you're processing the ore. So they have to be bolted to a hard floor in order to work right. But what would happen is the material comes in here. I don't know if you can see it, but there's a whole bunch of little riffle lines across this. You had asked me what mesh that you needed for something like this, and around 20 mesh, 30 mesh is a good size for these. You can buy them like the RP4. Have you ever seen one of those? The RP4 is like a little thing
In
like
the
this.
magazine.
Yeah, well, I've seen them for sale. I've seen them in person. But again, they still have to be bolted to the floor, because if all of these units, if you don't solidify them to the floor, the whole thing will just shake, and then you don't get a good recovery of the gold. This thing, has a flywheel. It would shake back and forth a little bit faster than 1 time a second. So boom, 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 maybe 2 times a second. Bump, 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 bump. Some of them are a little faster. But that's the kind of range that they go back and forth. And you dial them in with the right slope and the right amount of water. And once you get them dialed in, they actually work really great. Now they're not very cheap. That's one of the things about these is they're not cheap, but they're very efficient. They actually do a great job of separating out the gold and the waste. It's basically a vibrating sluice box. I mean, you can see the riffles. You've got a table, and the material's introduced here. And what happens is the light stuff goes down, and then on this one you have a wall. I've seen a lot of them where there's no wall, it's just a long collection trough. But it goes down to a wall, and then there would be a collection trough over there in the corner at the end of the wall that would collect all your waste, which would be the crushed up quartz and things like that. The gold has a high tendency to ride real high on the riffles, and actually bigger gold will ride actually above the riffles. I don't know if you can see the riffles here, but there's a number of these riffles going down. The other gold, smaller gold, will catch on these riffles, and it will work they won't go over it, but they'll work their way out, and then continue to work their way out and stay across the ends of the riffles and make that down to the side of the table that goes off that way. And so you'd have different collection troughs. You have a collection trough for waste, and then you have a collection trough for the best, and usually there's a There's either a number 1 middlings, which is not the best, but the next grade down, and sometimes there's a 1 and 2 middlings. And so you get the good stuff, the waste, and then middlings are what you have in between, and you may have 2 different levels of middlings depending on how rich it is. You may want to retreat those or do something with them. But usually the product that comes off of this is really clean, especially the number 1s, and requires some, but not a lot of cleaning up to be ready to pour it into a bar. And so there's a lot of smaller scale mining operations that have some sort of crushing, like a jaw crusher, and then some sort of secondary crushing, the equivalent of the stamp mills that we were looking at, that would crush from, you know, like -1.5 inches or something like that, down to like sand size, like 20 mesh, something like that, 30 mesh. And then you treat it with something like this, and the tails that you get, if you have it dialed in right, are pretty low grade, not much in there. Although, you know, if you have a cyanide system, there's usually enough gold in that it's worth cyaniding. But that's only if you're not a small operation. If you're a small operation, you're not going to have enough to make it worthwhile. But a small operation, you get the concentrate and the middlings, you do some treatment on them, and you end up with a fairly concentrated fine gold that you can actually melt and pour a bar out of. And then the bar could go to a refinery where they would pay you for the gold and/or silver values. Yeah, this thing has a motor and an eccentric that makes it shake back and forth. And like I say, it has to be anchored to the floor solidly. Otherwise the whole thing shakes, and you don't want that. You just want the table to shake. So there's some ideas maybe that would help you, but we're going to go next and take a look at the part where they melted the material and poured a gold bar. Now actually here at this mill, they actually had a full, because this is a big mill, they had a full cyanide process. But I'm not going to go into that today because small miners are not really likely to be using cyanide unless you're doing a heap leach, and that's a whole other topic that we'll get to some other time. Okay, so let's go take a look at the where they actually melt it down and make a bar. Okay, so we're here in the furnace room where they actually melted and poured the bars. And this is the furnace, and actually the crucible would go in here. They would take the gold and silver powder that they got, or gold and silver sponge that they got from mercury retorting, or whether they use cyanide, and they would mix it with a flux. And when I do fluxing and melt gold and silver, I use about 50-50 of borax and sodium carbonate, okay? And that makes a good glassy flux, and it'll dissolve, you know, iron oxides and any quartz or whatever that's in there. So you use that flux, it helps dissolve out the junk that's in there, junk remaining with your gold, any black sand or whatever. And then you melt the whole thing, and then they actually use this lever and hook type system right here. They would, you know, reach in there, grab hold of the crucible, pull it out, tilt it up, and pour it into a mold. And the mold would be sitting right here in this area. Now, the crucible, I was going to show you the crucible. The crucible right here is what they use. They would put everything in there, and that would be melted. That one's a pretty good size one. When I used to do this in Central Nevada, my crucible was about the size of a 5-gallon bucket. But that's bigger. And this is a bigger mill, and they were processing a lot more gold and silver. Seeing any pieces in there? Any big chunks of gold and silver? Ha! Don't say anything. No, that doesn't look right. Anyway, that's how they would process or in the old days, the old school way of doing it, and pouring a gold bar. And actually, the Carson City Mint isn't that far from here, and the Carson City Mint would take their impure gold and silver bar, and they would refine it and charge them a fee and basically turn it into gold and silver coins.
So if you had a coin from the Carson City Mint,
Yep.
the gold could have came from here.
It could have. I actually have both a gold and a silver coin from the Carson City. I have a couple of silver coins from the Carson City Mint. And some of the silver coins I have are from an age that they almost certainly came from here, like from the 1870s and stuff. The gold coin I have is from the 1890s and may or may not have come from here.
So you could track it from the source
Yeah.
to the mill.
Yep. To
the man.
the money in the hand of people to go out and spend it. And they were literally, by crushing rock and processing ore, they were minting money. It's a multiple step process, but yeah, they were making money legally. Well, Jeff, thanks for standing in with me today. And
Good time.
if you want to see more about our experience here at the Donovan Mill, take a look at Jeff's channel. We'll have something up there. And if you want, you can even arrange a tour at the Donovan Mill. They give tours here. So we're coming out to see if you're in the Virginia City area.
Definitely come and see it. It's well worth it.
Yep. Okay.
So today we looked at stamp mills and basically the concept of crushing rock and extracting the gold and silver out of it. Now there's hard rock mines with gold all over the western US and indeed all over the world. And these stamp mills were used, there were thousands and thousands of them back in the day. Later on they were replaced by ball mills, which we'll talk about one of these days. It's a different process, but it's more efficient, more energy efficient. And but the idea is there were easy ways of crushing rock, and then they recovered it by various methods. You can see the tables that are out in front of these stamp mills. They were basically long sheets of copper, basically copper sheets, and then they would put mercury on top of the copper, and the mercury would stick to the copper, and then the ore would flow over the top, and the gold that was in the ore would sink in and amalgamate with the mercury that were on there. And then eventually when they did cleanup like this picture shows, they would scrape off the copper and scrape off all the mercury they could, and then they would have the gold that had stuck to the mercury. They also cleaned out the battery boxes. You can kind of see some of that where in the box where the stamps actually hit and crushed the ore, gold would get caught in there too, and they would pull that out. But hopefully this has given you some ideas for how to process ore. And like I say, there are thousands of these mines all over the world, that hard rock mines. And hard rock is a source of gold that a lot of people are getting into. And I hope this has helped you some. Now, if you want to learn the skills of prospecting, because I haven't really talked about, well, how would you find the gold ore that you crush to extract gold out of? Well, that's a skill of prospecting. And I want to tell you that I wrote a book about prospecting for gold. It's called Fistful of Gold, because I want you to have the skill to be able to find fistful of gold. And I'm going to tell you a little bit more about my book right now.
So let me tell you a little bit more about my book. It's called Fistful of Gold, and I wrote it because I want you to be able to go out and find for yourself fistful of gold. And you can see that it's an encyclopedia with all kinds of information, pictures, and that sort of thing. It's not in color, but color would have cost me a lot more to have printed, and so the book would have cost a lot more. It's for sale on Amazon, and you can pick it up. I'll put a link in the description below. I also serve as the editor for a prospecting magazine. It's ICMJ's Prospecting and Mining Journal. And honestly, you should check that out. We got stories and information, legal stuff, everything you know to increase your skills as a prospector. I write articles in this every month, and a lot of other very experienced prospectors contribute to the magazine as well. So check the magazine out. Also, I have a website, and the website is at NevadaOutbackGems.com. I'll put a link for it in the description below, but there's gobs of information there that you will find useful in your prospecting efforts. Finally, I want to say that I really appreciate your comments and thoughts, and even positive criticism. Don't come on there and just toss out insults because I'll just delete your comments. But if you've got helpful things to say and questions to ask, do write and put those in the comments, because I answer my comments to people, and you'll hear from me in responding to you. So if you've enjoyed this video and you like what you see and you're interested in finding out more, well then sign up, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so they'll let you know when I post new videos. And like it and share it if again you see stuff that you really are excited about. And I'll be coming out with lots more new videos, and so we'll see you again real soon.